Hey, we're going to try to, good morning, seniors. Going to try to cover a lesson here without me teaching it in class, because in class I want to be practicing for the tests and so forth. So the lesson is on policy. I mean, it's a unit in one lesson. And I'm going to go ahead and warn you. Let's take a look. If we go down here, there's one heading. I think there's about five headings. Two, three, four, yeah, and then five. It ends with welfare stuff. If you don't feel like you got to write something down, don't do it. And especially number two. I mean, several of these things you cover in economics class, so you probably know it pretty well. But not the first one. The first one's important. And there have been standalone free response questions on this, so we got to make sure we get it covered. All right, so let's go right here. So we've got a couple of, as always in government, a big part of it is definitional. So public policy, real complicated definition, huh? Everything the government does. Duh. So what does the government do about gun control? What does the government do about gay marriage? What does the government do about abortion? What does the government do about immigration? What does the government do about health care? What does the government do about the economy? Yada, yada, yada. All right, now it's a process. It's a five-stepper. So let's go ahead and get the steps memorized, and then we'll define each step. And then, boom, you got it, and you'll have something to write. So let's see. It goes. We're memorizing the second letter: identification, formulation, adoption, implementation, evaluation. All right. So I came up with an acronym. It's not great. If AIE, so I'm full, am I eating? I mean, if you were eating while you were full, you would ask yourself, am I eating? Am I really eating? Sarcastically or something like that. Okay? I'm full, am I eating? The identification, if there's a problem, school shootings, healthcare, immigration. That's probably the top three problems on the agenda domestically. North Korea, Middle East. You can add to it. If something gets on the agenda. All right, so I'm going to follow the issue of healthcare through our little process here because we have seen healthcare policy be adopted and evaluated in your lifetime, and we've kind of talked about it last semester. We watched a real good film on it. All right, so my example I'm going to send through our little chart here is healthcare. Okay, so Obama got elected, and so an item on the agenda, early on, it was the second thing he dealt with after, the bailout was healthcare. Okay, so then he's going to formulate a policy. So we watched a real good video. It's called Obama's Deal. And Obama's all idealistic, but he's got to, twist some arms and make some deals he may not be real happy with in order to get something passed. So a lot of times it's not what's the best policy for Democrats. Jimmy Carter the other day said, Canada's policy is the best, simplest, single payer. In other words, the government pays for your health care. Now, the problem with that one is it won't pass. He knew it wouldn't pass. It's cost a lot of money. It's big government stuff. So he might not he said as much. He doesn't really have a problem with single payer health care, but he knew it didn't have a chance. On the other hand, you could go something small. And if it's a small change in policy, that's called incremental. So DACA would be a small change in immigration policy, or the wall would be a small change, whereas comprehensive would be you're dealing both with the border and all the people already here. So Obama was thinking big when he got elected president. It was a historical election, so he wanted to leave his mark with comprehensive health care reform. So he had three options there if he was going comprehensive. Single payer, where the government pays for everything. He originally talked about something called the public option, where if you didn't like your insurance, you could buy a government plan, and the idea is that would drive down costs. But it also didn't have a real good chance of passing because insurance companies didn't like it. They would lose money. So he went with what's called the individual mandate, which requires everybody to buy health insurance. If everybody's buying health insurance, that's good for the insurance companies, and everybody gets covered, and then the government subsidizes, folks that don't have a lot of money. Pre-existing conditions, that would just mean that'd be a small change where when you switch jobs, you don't lose your health insurance, but that was too small for Obama at the time, so he went with incremental. Okay, so that was the formulation. So then you got to get the thing passed. The film was about the process, and it was a very difficult process. He had, you get the feeling he was kind of buying off the insurance companies in one way or another, but they finally got it passed. And you got a pretty famous moment there when it passes. Obama is shaking Biden's hand, and Biden whispers, "This is a effing big deal," in his ear there. All right, president could also make an executive order if it won't pass Congress. So DACA is our pretty prominent example of that. All right, so what's coming next? I'm full. Problem identification, problem policy formulation. Am I eating? So once you adopt it, you got to implement it. That's what the bureaucracy does. So remember now, the bureaucracy is made up of 4 types. You got the cabinet. Those are all the departments. The executive department is headed by a secretary. Government corporations, Amtrak, and the post office, they charge a fee. A lot of y'all missed this one. Independent executive agencies. So I think I just said executive agencies. If it's an agency, it is independent of the cabinet. So that's what independent agencies means. NASA was our example. Doesn't really fit in maybe the Defense Department. So it's independent of any cabinet department. And then finally, regulatory commissions. They regulate something in the economy. The FCC, Eminem says, won't let him be, so it regulates what's on the airwaves. The FEC, Federal Elections Commission, regulates money and politics. And then the Fed, the FED, regulates the economy. And we'll look at that with a monetary policy here in a couple of minutes. All right, but they implement the law. They carry out the law, and you got discretion. I'm using discretion to carry out these education policy here. I'm a bureaucrat on the state level. If the policy seems to be unclear, they make rules about exactly how it's going to be carried out. And the rule coming out of Obamacare was it was unclear whether Obamacare, which said that companies got to provide health insurance, has to include provision of birth control for ladies. And Hobby Lobby had religious objections to that. And so the administration, the department, HHS, Health and Human Services, made a rule, said, yeah, you got to cover birth control. So Hobby Lobby didn't like that. So boom, what they do? Evaluation. They griped about it and they sued. So there's a Hobby Lobby court case. I believe Hobby Lobby won. All right, so people raised concerns. The concerns raised about Obamacare that Trump has really been receptive to is the cost of it, that, it costs too much money. The mandate, and it was like freedom's being taken away if the government's forcing you to buy something. So once people gripe about it, the process starts over. So people raise concerns over a Supreme Court case, and the process starts over. And so it's going to start over with Trump with repeal and replace. His effort to repeal and replace. According to Trump, he has managed to get rid of the individual mandate. I hadn't followed it close enough to know exactly whether I think that he has or has not done that. But the process starts over with evaluation. All right, so there it is. I'm full, am I eating? All right, so problem identification. So the P is for, so then it's policy, everything else. All right, full, policy formulation. So he's going with a mandate. So the problem is healthcare. Formulation, he's going with a mandate. All right, am I eating? Adoption. He adopted, Congress passed it. Big effing deal. Am I? The Department of Health and Human Services implemented it, including a rule requiring Hobby Lobby to cover birth control, and they griped about it. So then evaluation, people start talking about what's wrong with it, and then you start trying to fix it and reform it. All right, so those are the 5 steps. Okay, we are now looking at types of policy, and it's mainly economic. All right. So economic policy is shared between Congress and the President. So Article 1 of the Constitution, you may remember, is what Congress can do. So there's a number of we memorize all the economic powers, taxing, borrow money, coin money, printing money, counterfeiting and bankruptcy laws. Also, post offices and roads, that's interstate commerce stuff. So that's what Congress can do about economic policy. The President appoints Secretary of Treasury. President Clinton negotiated treaties, Postmaster General deals with all that stuff, and then he's enforcing these economic laws. All right, so it's a shared power. Now, maybe you don't need to write this down. I think you've learned this in Dr. Marcus's class, but the government is dealing with the business cycle in making decisions. So we are in a period of expansion right now. At some point, we'll hit a peak and a contraction, and then we'll slow down. President Obama took office during a recession. The definition of recession is 2 quarters where the economy's not growing, and then once it hits the trough, it grows again. So then the question is, should the government do anything about it, get involved in this, or just kind of leave the process alone? Traditionally, Republicans say just leave it alone. What they're worried about is inflation. If things are going good, you're worried about inflation, so the Fed might raise interest rates. Bad times, you're worried about unemployment. Okay? Okay, so I'll let you review that. I'm going to pause. Might not wanted to have written down every single thing there. Okay, so then number 3. Remember, you got 5 of them. Okay, so regulating the economy. There's 2 ways the government can regulate. Regulate means to control. When I go over there to the thermostat and hit it down to negative 3.0 and all the ladies start saying it's too cold, yada, 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 I'm regulating the temperature. All right, so the government regulates the policy 2 ways, through fiscal policy and monetary policy. Fiscal policy is taxing and spending. And Democrats have used a policy called Keynesianism. In bad times, the Depression, the recession, the government spends a lot of money and they cut taxes. So the idea is in bad times, you want people to go money in people's pockets. In good times, what Keynes said was that you would raise taxes and cut spending to get money out of people's pockets so you don't have inflation. Nobody ever really does that. You can't get elected saying, I'm going to raise your taxes or cut Social Security. All right. Republicans traditionally said, so here's the prescriptions. Republicans generally say, don't do anything. Just let the business cycle work on its own. The economy will naturally grow and correct itself if the business cycle is left to itself. All right, Keynes said, like I said, and no, the government needs to offset whatever happens to be going on. So if it's bad times, we need more money. So the government can give us more money by cutting our taxes and increasing our grandparents' Social Security. But then when the danger is inflation and a boom, you raise taxes and then you cut spending. The problem of Keynesianism, generally speaking, is nobody ever follows his prescriptions for good times. Politicians who raise taxes don't get elected, and so the deficit we have a lot to do with that. All right. Monetary policy, that's the Fed. So it's a bunch of regional banks and one central bank in Washington, D.C. And they've got a chairman and a board of directors, long term. So it's all practically, he's appointed by the president. It's practically it's the closest thing to the Supreme Court, very trustee-ish. So in other words, people like monetary policy, one reason is they don't have to worry about politics very much. Okay. Now, we have a problem today of deficits and debt. Our deficit per year right now is $1 trillion a year. We're spending $4 trillion a year, and we have running a deficit of $1 trillion. It is associated. I mean, it started with Roosevelt. It really got accelerated under Reagan because he cut taxes while increasing spending on the military. Clinton balanced the budget. Then Bush, kind of copied Reaganomics, and then hey, it went up under Obama as well because of the healthcare spending. So the deficit means government spends more than it takes in taxes. All right, and so a bunch of deficits over time is a debt plus interest. All right, so what do you do about all this debt? Well, you could raise taxes. That's not very popular. You could cut spending. That's not very popular either. You could do both of those. The first Bush and Clinton did that and were successful in eliminating the deficit for a year or two there. And then generally speaking, folks, generally speaking, what politicians do is neither, or, they take action to make it worse, both Trump and Obama. Increase the debt. All right, so those are the approaches to it. Okay. Review to yourself. I'll take a little break. And here we go, the next one. All right, we're on number 4 here. All right, debt's a big deal. Why does it matter, debt? Because that adds to what's called mandatory spending. So the interest on the debt is part of the mandatory spending. The big part of mandatory spending is entitlements that we automatically qualify for. My parents are in their 70s, so they automatically qualify for Social Security and Medicare. If your income's below a certain level, you automatically qualify for Medicaid. In theory, Congress could cut these things, but Social Security in particular is called the third rail of American politics, so almost never happens. So only about a third of the budget, a little more, so we're spending $4 trillion a year. Congress really has decisions to make for about $1.3 trillion of that $4 trillion. Only about a third of spending is discretionary, where the government can actually decide what to do. So and a big part of that's military spending. Okay. Okay. Let's go ahead and point out, in discretionary spending, anti-poverty programs about 3%. So a big part of it is military. All right. The budget. All right. The government gets help on the budget. The president. So when you're making a budget to decide if you're going to cut the deficit or not, every year the president gets together with the OMB, Office of Management and Budget. And the president gets the departments, the OMB gets together with the departments, and they make, they listen to what the president, kind of the president's recommendation, what his priorities are. So then the president will, after the OMB is going back and forth with the executive departments, propose a budget. So then it goes to Congress. And the departments will request a budget. Each department will request a budget basically from the Appropriations Committee, how much money is going to be spent. And they work with the Congressional Budget Office. And the OMB tends to be very optimistic in its projections of the way a program is going to work out for the budget, how much it's going to cost. CBO tends to be pessimistic. All right. So that's pretty good pie graph. Okay, and so that's our debt. That's how much we spent in 2017, $4 billion. Okay. There are 2 types of budget committees. There's authorizing and appropriations. Authorizing, when you're an author of a book, you're making it, right? So the authorizing committee says, hey, we're still going to have a Social Security program. We're still going to have Medicaid and Medicare. We're still going to have a military budget. They don't say how much is going to be spent. They just say, are we still going to have this program? President Trump has asked Congress not to reauthorize the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So every now and then, Congress will just get rid of a program altogether. The Appropriations Committee is where the controversy comes in, because most of the time programs get reauthorized, but they either get an increase in their budget or a cut. So how much money is, look at the word. Whoop, can't look at the word, Dr. McKenzie, you messed with me. Where is it? There it is. How much is the appropriate amount? Okay. So after the departments go back and forth with the appropriations committees, and Congress submits a budget, and then the question is, can Congress vote to pass this budget, that's been negotiated? So they pass it, the president signs it, well, we got a budget for that year. If they can't, they pass something called a continuing resolution. So they pass one back in the fall when they're arguing over DACA. If they can't, and the continuing resolution is just an agreement to continue spending at the current levels, continue the current budgets. The current amount is the appropriate amount. Or if they can't agree on a continuing resolution, you have a government shutdown. So that's what happened back in the fall sometime, maybe October, November. All right, so those are the controversies. Okay, review. Do I have a review? Nope. All right, so review the budget. Okay, so the OMB is working with the president, goes back and forth with the departments. The CBO is working with Congress. Congress submits its budgets. The departments ask for a budget. The Congress submits a budget, and then they authorize the programs. They're going to continue to exist, but then the controversy comes for the appropriate amount. And if they can pass a budget or a continuing resolution, the government keeps doing it. If they shut it down, well, then Bill Clinton meets Monica Lewinsky. Okay, last one, welfare. Welfare policy. So if we go back to the policy process, remember, I'm full, am I eating? So a problem formulation, back in the 30s, you had a bunch of widows. You had a bunch of poor mothers, widows, whose husbands died in World War I or in mining accidents. So part of the, it's the Depression. So part of the Social Security Act was something called Aid to Families with Dependent Children. So Congress passed it. Formulation. So then it gets carried out. Implementation. The way it got carried out was if you were a single mother, you got the check. Well, over time, single mothers became not widows, but people who were, ladies who were voluntarily single, either because of divorce or because they never got married. And in fact, there was a rule in AFDC. It was called the man in the house rule. And so if there was an adult male in the house, the mom doesn't get the check. Well, what kind of incentives does that provide? Men become irresponsible fathers and are out on their own, roaming around, being players. And single mothers are raising the kids using those checks. Was the line of critique that really Reagan used against it. So when you're evaluating the policy, Reagan's saying this is, government's not the solution, government's the problem. The problem is it's undermining the family, it's undermining the work ethic. All right, Clinton is the guy who really dealt with the problem. Under Clinton, Congress passed. Oh, okay. So divorce rate and out of wedlocks grew. So you're evaluating it, and Republicans started saying, well, this is a cure. This poverty cure is worse than the disease of poverty itself because it's undermining the family, it's undermining the work ethic. So you can trace, they argued, a lot of social problems back to this well-intended government program that was undermining the family, undermining the work ethic. Divorce went up to 50% from the 30s to the 80s. All right, so when you're, so you start over there, so Clinton, working with Republicans, reformed it. That lady was the Octomom back in, around 2000. And she was single. She had what's that? She had 8 kids, I guess. And, taking a lot of heat because she's getting the extra government check for each kid. So the new program was called TANF, Temporary Aid to Needy Families, put a 2-year limit on welfare, got rid of the marriage penalties, and it successfully, as we evaluate TANF, it successfully cut the number of people in welfare in half. So people work more today than they did leading up to the 80s. The divorce rate about the same. The family structure hadn't really been improved very much. The divorce rate's gone down to maybe 45%. Okay, how do you pay for it? Well, with taxes, progressive taxes are the income tax. So there's an area where the government is discriminating legally, making distinctions between income levels. The wealthy pay a higher percentage of taxes. A regressive tax, an example of that would be a sales tax. Bill Gates buys a gallon of milk and a janitor buys a gallon of milk. Well, that sales tax is certainly a higher percentage of the janitor's income than Bill Gates's. All right, a flat tax. A lot of conservatives, including presidential candidate back in 2012, I guess, wanted a flat tax, where everybody pays the same percentage. All right, the types of taxes we use, income tax is 40% of the taxation. It was enacted by the 16th Amendment. Payroll taxes are 30%, followed by Social Security and Medicare taxes. All right, we also borrow. I don't think you need to know the rest of that. Okay, and boom. All right, let's see how much time it took us. I think that's not too bad.